Perfect.
Marvelous. Well, a warm NFTS welcome, Christopher. Thank you very much for joining us. And I have a short introduction in which I describe you as a playwright.
I read your notes.
Oh, you did?
Yeah,
well,
earlier on.
Permit me to go through them for the benefit of the audience.
Absolutely.
So I introduce you as a playwright, screenwriter, translator, director, adapter of novels and plays, sometimes his own, fellow of the Royal Society of Literature, and I think since your last visit to the school, now a Sir, having received a CB for services to drama. I think that's occurred in the interim. So congratulations from the school for that. And thank you for joining us, and congratulations on The Father. And we have watched the Father gain success and awards, and it has finally reached the UK for us to see in cinemas, and what a moving piece of cinema it is. It's been screening at the school over the last couple of days, and you know, as much as I disapprove of, or not disapprove, but get annoyed by having to be on Zoom the whole time, as is the way of the world at the moment, this scheduling does allow us a bit of recovery time after seeing it. And I know, speaking for myself, I was left a complete wreck after seeing it. And in no fit state to have a conversation, as I'm sure many people were. So thank you for that breathing space. And welcome back to the school, if only virtually this time, even though you are only just down the road, as you said. Are you well at the moment?
Yes, fine. Thanks very much. Yeah. Yes, and happy to be with you.
Good, good. So as Venetia mentioned, I will start as per usual, I will start the conversation going with Christopher, and please put your questions in the Q&A box and we'll bring you in at a convenient point to ask them. And I have a long question to start off with about The Father, followed by lots of short ones. It seems to me that as a society, we are finally turning our attention to our aging population. And although this has been, you know, rather brutally accelerated by the pandemic, you know, whether we're in an aging population or not, we all become carers of some kind. And let's face it, we all age and we all die. And I was listening, there was a Start of the Week recently on Radio 4, which was tied around the idea of how to have a good death, which perhaps says more about the audience for Radio 4. But it was a fascinating program, and Lionel Shriver was on as a guest talking about her latest novel, which deals with that issue. And there was a quote that she read out from that book, which really resonated with me. And it was, "We are not living for longer, we are dying for longer." And then there followed a very interesting and rather tough conversation about how dementia and related conditions are a big part of this. And then another guest, who's a consultant geriatrician, talked about what he described as a collective amnesia we have as a society about this issue. And, you know, The Father, for me, just dramatizes so keenly, you know, this issue, along with the, you know, all the, you know, emotional and physical exhaustion that happens in these situations, and, you know, that they were discussing in this program, and that we as a society find so hard to tackle properly. And it kind of struck me that, you know, with a few honourable exceptions, you know, Haneke Zamor being one of them, cinema is also kind of guilty of this and is very reluctant to examine what happens to us as we get old. And in particular, what happens to, you know, our mind, our sense of self. So, and here's the question finally. When you started thinking about adapting The Father from Florian Zeller's play, which you had already translated into English from for the stage, how much was this a part of the conversation? You know, how convinced were you of the stage play's adaptability for film, not only creatively, but commercially too?
Well, that's a very interesting series of questions. I mean, to start at the end, the extraordinary thing about The Father is it had already been filmed. In 2015, I think, they made a film called Floride, with Jean Rochefort, which I purposely have never seen, actually, which Florian was very unhappy with, or, you know, and the remarkable thing about the French producers of Floride was that they listened when Florian said to them, "Look, why don't you do another film, and let me direct it, and I'll, you know, I think I could do something." And this is a situation which is sort of fairly inconceivable in this country. It's hard enough getting one film made of a difficult subject, leave alone two. So great thanks to them, for the French producers, for having initiated all of this in the first place. I mean, I met Florian because I was aware of him. I'd already seen a play of his called The Truth the year before in Paris, which is actually a riotous comedy, funnily enough. And I'd marked him down as a kind of interesting writer. And then I heard that this play, The Father, was on. It's 2014, and it sounded very intriguing. So I went to Paris to see it. And, you know, I had the same reaction that you described to the people have had to the film, which was I was absolutely knocked out by it. And then I met him directly afterwards, because he was at the theatre, and said, you know, I thought this play was wonderful, would you let me translate it? And so that's how our working relationship began, which has really been very, very fruitful over the last few years, and in the sense that I've now translated 7 of his plays, and
wow.
And also embarked on him on this collaboration to do this film. Now, you know, it was actually, having said what I did about the French producers, it was very, very difficult along the way to raise the money for this film. It was very difficult to persuade theatre producers to move the play from the Studio Theatre in Bath, where it premiered, to London, because people kept saying, "Well, you know, I don't think if anyone wants to see this sort of thing." And our job was to try and persuade them that people did want to see this kind of thing. Although the film has, as you've seen, the benefit of having Anthony Hopkins and Olivia Colman and a lot of other good actors, and it was a very small budget, $5 million. It was exceedingly difficult to raise this money, and we did at one point look as if we weren't going to make it, but then actually an individual, a Swiss, who has nothing to do with the film industry, a Swiss billionaire, stepped in and put up 60% of the money. So then we were able to make it, but it wasn't easy. This is, I mean, it's a subject that's been treated by a number of films, but always slightly from the, I guess, from the outside. And I think what our notion was in this film was to somehow immerse the audience in the kind of experiences that a sufferer from this awful condition might be going through. And as you say, so many of us have direct or indirect experience of this because we're living much longer. Mm-hmm. When we were doing the play, when we first were in rehearsals with the play, we invited the director invited a neurologist over to talk to the cast about Alzheimer's, and the particular sort of refined cruelty of this condition is that it establishes itself when you're in your 20s or 30s, and it doesn't declare itself for a long decades usually. And when it does declare itself, it's of course too advanced to treat. Mm-hmm. And I think what all the work is, and there have been some success just recently, but all the work in trying to deal with Alzheimer's at the moment has to do with finding a way of identifying the condition early on, when it can be arrested, it can't be reversed, I don't think, but
Sure.
but it could be arrested. But until such time as they manage to do that, increasing numbers of us are going to have to deal either directly with it or indirectly with it.
Absolutely. And when you were going through that period of, struggling to raise the the other 60 or so percent of it, and presumably getting a lot of no's at that point, were those no's that were accompanied by a no, nobody wants to watch a film about someone with Alzheimer's kind of, or was there any kind of explanation with the no? Or?
No, I think it was a kind of reaction that I've really become incredibly familiar with over the years, which is, well, we think this is wonderful, this is an extraordinary script, but it's not what we're looking for at the moment.
Right, they're not for us.
And really, after I don't know how many years of it, what you really want people to say is, I'm sorry, I'm afraid the script is absolute shit, but we're obliged to make it.
And when you're credited as a screenwriter along with Florian on this, so your co-screenwriters, were you in? That's not just because he wrote the play, right?
No, it was an unprecedented sort of experience for me. There are other films that I've written. For example, The Quiet American, it says it's written by me and Robert Schenkan. Well, what happened there was that I was sent Robert Schenkan's script and asked if I would rewrite it. And I said I didn't want to rewrite it. I didn't even want to read it, but I would love to write The Quiet American. And therefore, I wrote The Quiet American without the benefit of having read Robert Schenkan's script at all. Nevertheless, contractually, he was credited as a co-screenwriter. In this case, Florian asked me to work with him on it, and we started off by discussing how we would do it, precisely how we would do it. And first of all, we decided to have a series of sort of conversations about what exactly we wanted the film to do and what our approach was going to be. Because there are, of course, with any adaptation of a play to a film, there's all kinds of things you can do. Now, generally speaking, what you're advised to do is open it out if you're going to make a film from a play. And we, of course, I think that's probably what happened with Florida.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I had a peek at the trailer, and they definitely have opened it out. I mean, there is a journey to Florida, so they've obviously opened it out.
But I think what we decided in the course of this conversation, what we decided to do was rather to close it down, mm-hmm. And to make it as claustrophobic as possible, because what we defined as the task was to convey the sort of physical experience of undergoing this condition. So then we discussed it, as I say, at some length, and then Florian wrote a script in French, and he sent it to me, and I translated it, but also rewrote it. So I responded with a script in English, which he then, he accepted some of the things and he queried others and had further ideas. So he wrote a third draft in French, and then I wrote a fourth draft in English. And then we figured we'd sort of done this enough, and met in Paris for a few days, really, no more, and went through it sort of line by line, just negotiating our way through it. And then what we wound up with at the end of that fifth draft was pretty much exactly what was shot. So it was a very unusual, and it's continued because we're now working on. We're in pre-production actually for the film of The Sun, which is another play in that trilogy of Florian's.
Right.
And we've been Zooming today with lots of the actors and talking to them about the script. Just before I came on to talk to you, I was talking to Florian about a particular section that we want to that we were we're talking about, you know, we feel is not quite there yet. And he said, well, it's in 2 sections. He said, well, he would rewrite the first section, and why don't I write this second section in order to, you know, not take so much time, and then we can reconvene on Saturday, and I can see what he's written, and he can see what I've written.
But him still working in French and you still working in English.
Yeah, he writes in French because, you know, he's French. Reasonable. So it's a really marvelous collaboration that I've been lucky enough to land in.
Yeah.
And one I hope that will go on, because what was the unknown factor in all of this was he'd never even directed in the theatre before, you know, he turns out to be a really good film director. So that's a piece of it's a piece of real luck.
That's incredible. And so you're not only exchanging drafts and your own writing and rewriting, but also between languages as well, just to make things that little bit easier.
As a matter of fact, it does. It's interesting because it does make it. There's a sort of liberating thing about. Of course, you're constrained to what the scene says, but I am able to make it speak in my own way, in a way that I probably wouldn't do if we were both English-speaking writers.
And I'd just like to sort of go back to one of the points that you made about this, you know, decision to keep it, you know, to open it in, as you say, and you know, that's one of the things that is, you know, so unique and devastating, really. You know, it's that, you know, when you're watching it, that kind of unfolding realization that this is Anthony's point of view pretty much all the way through, and you know, it's such a, you know, a trick, but such a powerful one to bring us into, to put us into his shoes, to put us into his mind. But I haven't seen or read the play, and I was wondering how much that worked, or is that how it worked in the theatre? Because it seems to be such a cinematic trick, but maybe that's just a failure of my imagination.
Well, I think with the theatre that there was a simple technical device, which was that, as you know, it's in a series of scenes, and every scene stuff is subtracted from the set. So furniture disappears, pictures disappear, you know, until at the end you're just left with a hospital bed, a bare stage. And so that's the theatrical device. And what we wanted to do was to find some completely cinematic equivalent. And the possibility that suggested itself was the sort of uncertainty of location, the fact that you seem to be in an apartment, but the apartment keeps changing around Anthony, so that he's never quite sure whether he's in his own apartment or somebody else's, or where he is really. And so he is constantly destabilized by changes of decor.
And we are too, as the audience, with him. I mean, I think that's the, you know, that point of view, and it's not just his mind, is it? We're kind of, because we're in those kind of overlapping and blending locations, that you're kind of almost taking the point of view of a space, or a series of spaces which have all melded in, presumably in his head, and you know, as that unfolded in the film, and you know, one has that experiences of putting that together oneself.
You can never quite understand. For example, you can never quite understand how what the time frame is,
Right.
and how long it's been going on, and you know what space there is between one scene and another, and you know, things just kind of loop back on themselves in a. In other words, I mean, I think what we decided to do was to sort of construct a puzzle
Right.
or maze from which there was no, for which there was no actual solution. You can't sort of work it out and say, well, this is what happened and this is what's happening here. Everything was a sort of suggestion, or was provisional, or was capable of being interpreted in two different ways, or more. And so you never know. Apart, what happens is that the film has a sort of conventional opening, so you sort of lull the audience into thinking, oh, I see, it's going to be one of those films, and then you suddenly pull the rug out, and after that, the rug never goes back.
And talking of time, one of the things that I noticed second time around watching it was that, you know, that the wonderful kind of, it's almost kind of like the running gag of the watch, and that it just never occurred to me watching it first time around that, of course, here is a man who's slipping in and out of different times, that he should be perpetually looking for his watch or having lost his watch. And you know, I just can imagine in a parallel universe there just being endless development discussions about, is it too on the nose? Is the shifting in time? It just works, and it.
Well, where we were tremendously lucky, and the films that I've worked on that have really worked have generally happened in this way. There was no, we just did what we wanted. We just made the film we wanted to make, and there wasn't a period of development. There weren't a series of discussions. There weren't people giving their advice. There weren't people saying, "Oh, you can't do this." We just worked out what we wanted to do, and then Florian did it. And I honestly think that is the best way to make a film. I mean, you know, led, I think, and I started off working, it was just a slight digression, but started off working in the BBC in television in the 1970s. And that was how it worked then. Now it's now looked back on as a sort of golden age. But what has happened in between, since I think the sort of bureaucratization of the BBC in particular, is that a series of officials appear at various ranks within the BBC, through which, as in a sort of ever tighter meshed net, you have to pass, and everybody makes their contributions or makes their suggestions, and what comes out of the other end is obviously going to be homogenized in some sort of way, or strained through a kind of agreed consciousness as to what is acceptable right now. And it's the sort of, it is a very, it deals a very heavy blow to any kind of originality.
Sure, there's the perils of sort of development by committee, I guess.
Yeah.
So just going back to this, to the father, and this sort of idea of inviting us into Anthony's, you know, point of view, and then, you know, it being in the maze, and, you know, never really putting the rug back, as you put it. There's that kind of, there's a couple of moments of violence actually in the film, which are, you know, incredibly powerful. And you know, I'm thinking, you know, particularly of the moment where Anne has sort of reached a real low point, and, you know, and then marches down walks down the corridor and into Anthony's room and tries to suffocate him. And, you know, that's you know, on the one hand, you know, that, you know, when I was watching that for the first time, it was, you know, this is a familiar idea of, you know, the carer at their wits' end, and the sometimes the dark fantasies that they might have and thoughts they might have. But then again, you know, as the film progressed and the moorings continued to slip, you know, one wonders whether is it that, or is it in some way more related to, built on the quicksand of Anthony's memory in some way? And then when the he's then slapped by the man, again, how, is this a memory, or is this kind of a confabulation? And does that come from his own anxieties? And people in these conditions can have incredible flashes of temper and sometimes, yes, violence. And it was amazing the way that kind of puzzle again opened up and into another layer.
Well, you don't know whether this is something that is going through Anne, the daughter's mind, as it might naturally do, or whether it's some function of Anthony's own paranoia, or something that he's imagined that she might want to do to him, or in the same way that the character played by Mark Gatiss, who appears at the end of the film as the male nurse in the scene. Well, there's a scene where he slaps Anthony. Well, these things do happen in care homes. So, maybe that did happen, or maybe Anthony was afraid of it happening, or maybe Anthony related something that the nurse did to something that his, Anne's boyfriend did, or you don't know, and you shouldn't. There's no reason why you should know. There's not, you aren't offered you aren't offered any ready conclusions or answers. It's up to you, really. It's just you don't know. I don't know.
No, and it's just that it's part of that the I guess the enjoyment, such it is for the audience, is being presented with that puzzle and knowing that you just never know, do you, in these situations? Because that's the truth of the matter. When your memory is slipping, is that there is no anchor point anymore to be able to work everything else out from. And I just wonder, in trying to adapt that and make that work on screen, you talked a little bit about the early discussions with Florian in adaptation, and and wanting to open it in. Were there any other sort of parameters or rules or guidelines that you set yourself as you embarked on that?
No, it was crucial to have a sort of design concept, and Peter Francis, who designed it, has talked about the fact that when he had his first meeting with Florian, he put down a kind of floor plan of the flat as he saw it, and then Florian produced his floor plan, which was exactly the same. So that started, that proved to them that they were both in the same wavelength, I guess. I mean, I think that the strategy, in a way, was to acquire a full sort of freedom by imposing more and more limitations on oneself. Starting off by saying, as let's open it in, and then the more constraints there are, in a way, somehow the freer you are with the subject like this. I can't explain it any better. But that's what I felt while we were working on it.
No, I mean, it does. There is actually I always think a logic to that, which is, you're presented with an infinite amount of choices. So if you give yourselves some strict rules and guides for your particular story or script, then you are not confronted by an infinite amount of choices. You're confronted by a finite, and you've got something to work through, and it's perhaps less. It gives you a more specific challenge rather than a general, oh, okay, well, where do I go next?
Well, generally speaking, I think the as a screenwriter, which I started working in the theatre, and that kind of somehow, for some reason, came quite naturally to me, although it's technically quite complicated writing for the theatre. But I think it was a long time before I was able to write screenplays anything like to my satisfaction, and I think that was started to happen when I when I began to impose limitations on what I was doing, and not, and sort of got rid of the illusion that the cinema allows you infinite freedom. It doesn't.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So I have a little bit of a screenwriter point, because there's a lot discussed, and there's a lot of advice, not all of it good, out in the big wide world about scripts and screenplays, and particularly weirdly about how they should look. I know there's a long history in why the format of the screenplay is the format of the screenplay. But that aside, there seems to be some very odd conversations, and people get very shall I say passionate about the way things should and sometimes shouldn't look. And I just thought that when I read the screenplay of The Father, I just thought there was a really good point to be made here, because on page 1 of the script, you have a very clear note on the design, and then also you introduce and describe and indeed give away much about the principal characters in the script, and that's not something that you see every day in screenplays. So
no, I would say that I do split that into two, really. I think that the descriptions of the device, the device we were using to indicate which set you were in and what was at any given time, is pretty essential to the way this particular script works. The descriptions of characters, it's not something I normally do, but Florian wrote these, and I translated them.
Right.
But I think, I think in this case they are probably quite helpful. It's just something I've never done personally.
You tend to see it. I see it more in plays, stage plays. The sort of the dramatist person, and maybe a little. But I was just very intrigued and also reminded that the script is there to serve the film, and it needs to do what it needs to do to put that into the reader's head and avert what is going to be as close as possible to what the film is going to be into the reader's head, and you have whatever you can use at your disposal to do that.
Yeah, and going back to what you were saying before, what you were saying earlier, I don't think that. I am aware of these kind of rules that are, prescribed for writing screenplays, and I don't sort of agree with any of them really, because I think that what makes an interesting film is something that's original, and you can't. That's not something that you can arrive at by saying, well, on page 33 there has to be an inciting incident.
Sure. I think the rule is, does it work?
Yes.
That's it. That's a question, really, rather than a rule. But that's the thing, really. So, and just the other thing that I wanted to touch on with The Father was the ending. If I can allow myself to go back there emotionally, and because there, although we never get to put together the puzzle of the maze, there is a coming together of our understanding of Anthony's predicament, and it was just surprising to me how emotional that moment was, and that it leans on that end scene leans on the sort of the coming together of the revelation of what the direction of travel has been, moving through the different locations, and the sort of the combinatorial effect of all of that. But also there's something very simple in, at various points he's in the film, and it's alluded to in the script, he's becomes childlike, or is treated in a childlike way. But here is where it really sort of comes together, and he's asking for his mother, and he becomes, and I think there's a line in the script where the nurse is she says she rocks him gently. He looks like a child in its mother's arms, and which is just so beautifully, done in that scene. And but on top of that moment, there's also this tree metaphor. And was that in the play as well?
That was always there in a sense. I mean, I think the last scene is like the first scene. It's it's somehow really happening in the way that the first scene did, and unlike all the sort of intervening scenes. But that's the destination you've been heading towards, and it was one of the things that struck me most about the play when I first saw it, which is that the play is written in extremely simple, straightforward language, and there's just this one sort of metaphor in it, really, where he says, "I feel as if I'm losing all my leaves."
Mm.
So powerful because it comes out of nowhere and it's so isolated and it's so and it's such a simple statement that it's always devastating. I mean, the thing about that last scene, which was it's just extraordinary to be at the shooting, because we only did one take. I mean, that's the take. Then, the usual sort of muttering behind the camera and so on. And Florian asked Anthony Hopkins to do it again. And he said, "No, I can't." Eventually he went away and had a sort of think about it for 45 minutes. And then he came back and did it again, but we used the first one. It was all one shot. So
wow.
We used the first one. And I think Anthony genuinely felt he couldn't do it again. He'd kind of done it, And so there are certain, I mean, if you were being hyper technical or critical, there are certain bumps in the final scene that perhaps you wouldn't have had if you'd. But there's a sort of raw authenticity in it that
absolutely
you'll never get it again.
No. And so were you on set that day, or were you on set throughout?
I was on set most of the time. I mean, Florian was understandably, I think, a little apprehensive at the beginning. He'd never directed a film before, and it was in a foreign language to him. So he asked me if I would go on the set, and then it worked very well. I had to leave for a chunk, and it was only 5 weeks shoot. We only had 25 days to shoot it. So I missed a couple of weeks in the middle because I had to go and deal with another project that was underway at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise, I mean, I was on set as much as I could be. And directors really vary enormously in this respect. There are directors who like you to be on the set when you're as a writer. Most conspicuously, I would say, is Stephen Frears, who actually has it in his contract that the writer should be on set all the time. And then there are directors who are plainly uncomfortable. I mean, it's usually pretty quick. You usually sense that pretty quickly, and then you stay away. So it's I mean, it's director's medium, so you have to go with whatever makes the director comfortable. And
was Florian sort of check? I mean, what was it? Sometimes I guess the life of a writer on set can also vary depending on what's going on at the time. But was Florian sort of using you as a regular check, or was he sort of coming to you with sort of specific issues, or was he sort of setting you up for things that were going to happen later that day? Or
well, we didn't do any rewrites, which is different from working with Stephen Frears, where we often do fiddle with things or adjust them on the day. But actually, I think you're just there. I was just there as a sounding board, really,
right?
And we would talk about the day's work, or the day ahead in the car on the way to the studio, and then I was, again, your instinct is to be reticent if you're a writer on set, but it soon became clear that he was very, very comfortable with you going and saying, what about this? Or how about thinking about that? And if he, if he liked it, he would do it. If he didn't like it, he wouldn't do it. But he was confident enough to, or secure enough, really, just to think, well, it can't do any harm to have a different eye on it.
No, it's a productive collaboration, clearly. And can I just ask, in the adaptation, in the process of writing, whether at the beginning or maybe actually then also when it came to pre-production, were you discussing any other films at all with relation to this? I mean, I know that design is so, there's for me, there's some echoes of some other films in the design of the flat and the rest of it, but I wondered how much you and Florian discussed other work.
That's interesting, because when I direct a film, I do like to. There are films in my mind, and usually I sort of settle on one. For example, in my first film as a director, which was called Carrington, I wanted to do something that's slightly unusual, which is to have a very light tone throughout, although the story is a tragedy. And the best film I could think of that achieved that was Jules et Jim, because it's it has this marvelous lightness, and then it ends in disaster. And so I used to watch that every weekend. But I don't think Florian. I know he did mention Rosemary's Baby to me once.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and although I would have thought Repulsion was probably more of a. Anyway, he certainly knows, he's very cine literate, but I don't think he derived direct inspiration from other films in the way I'm prone to do.
Yeah, no, I mean, Rosemary's Baby came into my head not for anything to do with the story, but actually the way the apartment is used, and that.
Yeah, that's right. The space,
and trying to find a way to frame the characters within a space which is where it's becoming something else.
Yes,
and there's something not quite right about it, and that sort of growing sense of dread. Although the sources of the dread are very different in those films.
Yeah.
Good. So I was just wondering if we could just switch up to having a little bit of a chat about your sort of general process in addition to the father. And there's something that I've heard you speak a few times, and I've read a few articles, and there's a story that keeps cropping up about atonement, and how you were getting off on holiday, and you bought the book in the airport and didn't have much of a holiday and were completely engrossed in the book, and then you ended up adapting it. And there's something that I always want to ask, so now I have the opportunity to do it, which is, was it already optioned at this point? Do you then have to, are you on the phone to your agent then saying, get me this, please, get me in front of them? Or
it wasn't quite like that. It was when I came back from Thailand, I rang my agent and said, look, I read this book on holiday and I think it would make a great film. And she said, oh, join the queue. And so it turned out that the situation, in this particular instance, the situation was that Ian McEwan had decided not to write it himself, but he had retained the right to choose the writer. So he was talking to various different writers. And so I really knew him slightly, but not very well. And what I was asked to do was to go and have dinner with him and say roughly what I thought I would do if I was writing the screenplay. Now the weird thing is, I mean, I got the job, obviously. The weird thing is that the resulting film bore very, very little resemblance to what I'd pitched to Ian. And in fact, the resulting film is much closer to the novel than what I pitched to Ian.
In fact, didn't you end up having to rewrite when there was a change of directors on that project? Was that
there was a change of director? Yes, Richard Eyre was going to do it, and then suddenly the money came, and he was doing Notes on a Scandal,
right?
And so Joe Wright arrived and said that that line that every screenwriter dreads. He said, "Well, this is very good, but I think perhaps we should start from scratch." So we did, yeah. So we started from scratch, and
but to good effect.
To good effect, yes. And I always paid great tribute to the way the process on that film. Joe Wright he's very obsessive and dogged, like a lot of the really good directors that I work with, and it was quite amusing. In the end, he would rewrite scenes that I'd written and fax them to me. I think we did fax in those days, and then I would think to myself, "Oh, I see that." So I sort of vaguely see what he's aiming at, and then I would rewrite it and send it back again. And eventually, we did a bit the same as I described with Florian. We went away to Italy for 2 weeks and finished it together. Again, going through it pretty much line by line. That was a film that kept on modifying in various ways all the way through to the end.
Mm-hmm.
Not least because we lost $5 million out of the budget. Exactly what The Father cost, in fact, but we lost $5 million out of the budget at the beginning of pre-production. And what came out of that was what's now a famous scene, the scene on the evacuation of Dunkirk, because what we did was we conflated all the various incidents that are supposed to happen to the soldiers as they march north,
right,
through France, and put them all into one shot.
It seems staggering that's the shot that actually saved money from the budget rather than
no, that's not. The thing was, it's a Steadicam shot. We only need the extra. It's 1,500 extras, but you only need them for one day.
Sure. No, it's just one of those things about film is that sometimes it's not the saving is not the obvious one.
Yeah, that's right.
And just to go back to the sort of the getting work. Do you how is that how it generally happens? You read something and then you track down your agent tracks down the rights holder and you try and get in that position to be invited, and you go through the same dance every time, or is it ever the case where you've actually discovered a book and actually just taken it to a producer and say, you should option this, let's do it? I mean, how much are you kind of hustling, and in which direction?
Well, it varies from one project to another. And I mean, recently, yes, I did find a book, and I took it to a producer and he's optioned it, and I'm going to write the script. But that's kind of unusual. What tends to happen is people, after a certain time, people come to you and make offers, and then you read the book and decide whether you can't, unless you sort of respond immediately and emotionally and instinctively to the thing in ways that you can't particularly define, but are always recognizable.
Mm-hmm.
Then it's not. Then you say, well, yeah, it's a great book, but it's not for me. So so there are some projects that I pursue. There are some projects that come to me, and then there are, I'm at the moment trying to raise money. I wrote an original script about my childhood in Egypt, and I'm trying to at the moment to raise the money to make that film. But that's an entirely sort of original project. Generally speaking, if I'm doing an original project, I'll usually do it as a play because
then someone can see if it works and option the play and go from there.
It's easier to get it's just much easier to get a play on.
That was
get a film.
Who was it? I think it was Frank Cottrell Boyce. His number one advice to screenwriters was to become a playwright. Write the play first. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely a logic to that, isn't there? So is that in terms of the projects that you've written, is that are there more original projects that you've written? Because you seem to have kind of become, you have become one of the big adapters, and that's what you're known for. That's your in the film industry, that's it seems to be that's the way that you're seen. But one never knows how many other projects you have. You're only often known by the projects that are made, and there may be.
I think it's certainly true. I mean, I think it works out. I think I've written somewhere over 50 scripts, and I think 18 of them have been made, which is a pretty good, I'm afraid, a pretty good score. I would think that there are certain projects, if I try to look back and characterize what didn't get made, it's often been sort of projects of a political nature that people are kind of back away from or are reluctant to do. 3 or 4 years ago, I wrote a screenplay about asylum seekers, a subject that seems to be constantly in the headlines, and you think, but nobody's really come forward to, or nobody's seems to want to do that at the moment. And you can't legislate as to what works and what's going to work and what isn't going to work, or what's going to get made and what isn't going to make. And what you have to cultivate is a sort of completely philosophical response to the horrible vicissitudes of even if you're doing well, two out of 3 of your scripts are not being made.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess that in most of the writers that I know or work with or talk to or read about, they often declare at some point that they, as much as they love adapting other people's work, that if push came to shove, they would rather write their own original work. Is that the same for you, or it sounds to me like it's you'd like to write whatever's going to get made? And
not really, because I think there's quite a sort of big side of me, which I kind of think of in terms of being a translator. So either means you're physically translating from one language to another, or you're translating from one medium to another. And I think directors, in a way, are kind of translators, aren't they? They take something off the page and put it on the screen, and that particular process is different from original creation. But it's not worse or better. It's just different. And what I do like to do is cover the field. In other words, I like to do all kinds of things. It may be that at the other end, a slightly distorted picture arrives because there's a whole, side of you or chunk of you that isn't, for one reason or another, hasn't come to light. But nevertheless, I like doing a theatre play and then doing a screenplay and then doing an opera libretto. Or I just like doing something this time that wasn't what I did last time.
Right. And I mean, that need to change things up is a familiar one, and I think we all feel that we want to keep things none of us want to be doing the same things
Well, no,
over and over.
actually, I don't know if I agree with that, because I think there are certain, there are certain a lot of artists who refine a personal style,
Right.
or writers who are instantly recognizable from their subject matter or their style,
Right.
or work in a certain, and I think actually they're the ones who tend to be better known. And they're the ones who tend to, be, Pinteresque or whatever.
Yeah.
Because Harold Pinter wrote in a certain way, and you always know it's Harold Pinter.
Yes.
So there's a clear choice between narrowing down on something original and unique that is your style, or contrary wise, being as eclectic as you possibly can.
Yes, so I think there was a difference that I was drawing between style and then subject matter, and that sometimes, you can hop about between subjects, but while refining your style.
Well, I always think, perhaps it's probably an illusion, but I always try to change the style according to the subject matter, and rather than imposing my style on subject matter.
Right, and that's why you're such a good adapter and translator, I guess. Then that's the key, is to find a way of bringing Ian McEwan or Florian Zeller or Joseph Conrad or Colette to screen without making it, without changing up the style in a way where it's obviously where it becomes something else.
Yeah.
It's changing the form rather than the author.
If you take Joseph Conrad as an example, which is a notoriously difficult example, it's trying to find a cinematic equivalent of that particular writer with his particularly vivid style.
And I just wanted to finish, because you mentioned your childhood, Christopher, and and that you're trying to actually bring that to cinema, which is fascinating. But could you just, for our students, just give us a quick potted history, because your debut as a playwright was at the Royal Court when you were at the tender age of 19. So, I mean, had you been writing for some time before that? Were you mentioned you were in Egypt? How did that come about?
I can't explain why I wanted to be a writer, but when I was sort of 8 or 9 years old, I decided that's what I wanted to do, and I started writing all kinds of things, stories and plays, and luckily my father was very encouraging, even when. Traditionally, when a teenager says to his parent, "I want to be a writer," the traditional response is, "Oh my God, don't do that." But my father was very. He seemed kind of chuffed at the idea of. So that was very encouraging. But I didn't know what I wanted, what I wanted to write, and I wrote. And the first substantial thing I did was I wrote a novel when I was about 16, 17, and sent it to every publisher in London, all of whom turned it down. Some of them, I actually had a letter saying, you seem to be very young, not to adopt some useful profession. But because the novel was clearly not going to be published and was being rejected, I just, because you're so sort of arrogant and ignorant and all the rest of it at that age, I thought, oh, well, then I'll try a play. And it just so happened that the play that I wrote got taken up. So and furthermore, in writing the play, and even in writing the novel, it dawned on me that the dialogue was really what I liked writing, and what I wrote best. And so, I mean, people, how I think of myself as I think of myself as a writer for actors.
Well, that's a good way of thinking about oneself, because without them, there is no action. There's nothing to film. There's nothing to watch. Well, Christopher, thank you so much for spending this very enjoyable hour with us and being so generous with your knowledge and generous of spirit. Good luck. I look forward to seeing your Egypt project come to life. My mother was brought up in her early years in Egypt too, so I will be taking her to see that when it comes out. And thank you very much to the school and the people at Casarotto for making this possible. And I guess I think, other than saying thank you, I would say to everyone, may we all hang on to our leaves for as long as possible.
Okay, thank you very much.
Cheers, Christopher.
Thank you. Bye. Bye-bye.